The champagne glass shattered on the polished floor of the first-class cabin as Isaiah's father rose from his seat. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who's in charge here," he said quietly. The white woman who demanded his son's seat paled when the pilot approached, calling him Mr. Jefferson. "Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready to see justice served in the most unexpected way. This story about racial prejudice, dignity, and sweet karma will leave you speechless." Marcus Jefferson, at 37 years old, had achieved what many considered impossible. As the founder and CEO of Azure Skies Airlines, he had transformed a small regional carrier into one of the most respected airlines in the country. But today, he wasn't focused on quarterly reports or expansion plans. Today was about his 12-year-old son Isaiah and their special father-son trip to New York City. They arrived at Atlanta International Airport 3 hours before their scheduled departure. Marcus always dressed comfortably for travel, a simple navy blue sweater over a crisp white button-down shirt, tailored dark jeans, and minimal accessories save for his wedding band and a subtle watch that cost more than some cars. Nothing about his appearance screamed, "I own an airline." Isaiah wore khaki pants and his favorite blue NASA t-shirt, excitedly chattering about the Metropolitan Museum of Art. "Dad, my teacher said the Egyptian collection is amazing. My project on ancient civilizations is going to blow everyone away," Isaiah said, bouncing slightly as they walked through the gleaming terminal. Marcus smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "Just wait until you see the Temple of Dendor. It's a whole ancient Egyptian temple inside the museum." As they approached the security checkpoint, Marcus felt the familiar tension creep into his shoulders. He'd experienced it countless times before, but his concern was always for Isaiah. The boy was still young enough that the unfairness hadn't fully registered yet, but old enough to notice the subtle differences in treatment. "Remember what we talked about, Isaiah," Marcus said quietly as they placed their carry-ons on the conveyor belt. "Always carry yourself with dignity. Some people might treat you differently, but that reflects on them, not on you." Isaiah nodded solemnly. He'd heard this talk before, usually before they entered spaces where they were the only black faces present. Sure enough, while white passengers streamed through the metal detectors, both Marcus and Isaiah were directed to the full-body scanners. Then came the random, additional screening. The TSA agent avoided eye contact as he explained the procedure to Marcus. "Sir, you've been randomly selected for additional screening." "Both of us?" Marcus asked calmly, nodding toward Isaiah who stood waiting. The agent hesitated. "Yes, sir. It's completely random." Marcus could have mentioned that he'd helped design the security protocols for this very airport. He could have pulled out his company ID that would grant him access to every secure area in the building. Instead, he placed a reassuring hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "It's all right. We have plenty of time." They submitted to the extra pat-downs and bag searches without complaint. Isaiah's eyes followed his father's example, maintaining a calm dignity that seemed beyond his years. When they finally reached their gate for Azure Skies Flight 237 to New York, the waiting area was already filling with passengers. Marcus guided Isaiah to the priority boarding lane, presenting their tickets to the gate agent. The young woman's eyes widened slightly at the first-class tickets, darting between Marcus and Isaiah before scanning the documents. Her demeanor was polite but tinged with that familiar uncertainty Marcus had seen 1,000 times before, the subtle doubt that they belonged in first class. "Everything seems to be in order, Mr. Jefferson," she said, returning their boarding passes. "We'll begin boarding in approximately 15 minutes. You and your son will be in Group 1. Marcus thanked her and led Isaiah to the nearby seating area. He noticed the gate agent whispering to her colleague, both occasionally glancing in their direction. He'd become an expert at pretending not to notice such things. "Dad, can I have the window seat?" Isaiah asked, oblivious to the subtle dynamics playing out around them. "Of course, buddy. That's why I booked 2A for you." When boarding finally began, Marcus and Isaiah were among the first to walk down the jet bridge. A flight attendant greeted them warmly at the aircraft door, directing them to the left toward the first-class cabin. As they settled into their spacious seats, Isaiah pressed his face against the window, watching the ground crew load luggage onto the plane. Marcus stored their bags in the overhead compartment and sank into his aisle seat, 2B. He didn't know it yet, but their peaceful father-son trip was about to encounter turbulence before the plane even left the ground. The first-class cabin of Azure Skies Flight 237 was the epitome of luxury. 12 spacious seats arranged in 3 rows of 4, with a wide aisle dividing them. Each leather seat could recline fully into a flat bed, with privacy panels that could be raised or lowered according to passenger preference. The cabin walls featured subtle blue lighting that gave the space a calm, sophisticated atmosphere. Isaiah was practically bouncing in his window seat as he inspected all the features: the personal entertainment screen, the charging ports, the small drawer containing noise-canceling headphones and a comfort kit. Marcus helped him buckle his seatbelt, smiling at his son's excitement. "This is so cool, Dad," Isaiah whispered. "Look at all these buttons." "Just don't press them all at once," Marcus joked. "And remember, you need to stay in your seat when the seatbelt sign is on." Other first-class passengers began filtering in: a middle-aged man in a business suit who took his seat across the aisle, an elderly couple who settled in the row behind them, a young woman who appeared to be a social media influencer taking selfies in her seat. The cabin gradually filled with the quiet murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of pre-departure beverages being served. Marcus checked his watch. The doors would be closing soon. He accepted a glass of water from the flight attendant while Isaiah chose apple juice, carefully placing it in his cup holder. That's when Diane Winters swept into the first-class cabin. She was approximately 45, with expensively highlighted blonde hair cut in a sharp bob and designer clothes that screamed old money. A Hermes scarf was draped artfully around her neck, and diamonds glinted from her ears, fingers, and wrist. Her entrance was announced by the strong scent of an exclusive perfume and the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to getting her way. The flight attendant, Alicia according to her name tag, approached immediately. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I help you find your seat?" Diane barely glanced at her. "I know where my seat is. 2A. Marcus felt a twinge of concern. He double-checked their boarding passes, confirming that Isaiah was indeed assigned to 2A. Diane stopped at their row, her gaze falling first on Marcus and then shifting to Isaiah by the window. Her expression hardened instantly. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Marcus while pointing at Isaiah. "That's my seat." Marcus smiled politely. "I think there might be a mix-up. My son is assigned to 2A. I'm in 2B." Diane's perfectly manicured hand extended imperiously. "Let me see your boarding passes." Rather than be confrontational, Marcus handed over their passes. Diane examined them with narrowed eyes before handing them back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Well, there's clearly been an error. I always book a window seat. I'm a Platinum SkyMiles member." She turned toward the back of the plane. "Flight attendant." Alicia approached quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Is there an issue?" "These people are in my seat," Diane stated flatly. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Alicia asked professionally. Diane rummaged through her designer handbag, eventually producing her boarding pass. Alicia examined it carefully, then looked up with an apologetic smile. "Ma'am, your assigned seat is actually 3C, which is an aisle seat in the next row." Diane's face flushed with indignation. "That's impossible. I specifically requested a window seat. I get motion sickness." "I understand, but according to our system, seat 2A is assigned to Mr. Jefferson's son," Alicia explained patiently. "I'd be happy to see if there are any window seats available after boarding is complete." "This is unacceptable," Diane hissed. "Do you know how much I paid for this ticket? These people should be moved to economy where they belong." The cabin fell silent. The businessman across the aisle looked up from his newspaper. The influencer stopped mid-selfie. Isaiah's eyes widened as he glanced nervously at his father. Marcus maintained his composure, but his jaw tightened. He'd encountered this scenario too many times before, the assumption that he and his son couldn't possibly belong in first class, that they must be in the wrong place, that they should give up their rightful spots to accommodate someone else's sense of entitlement. "Ma'am," Alicia began, her professional demeanor strained, "Mr. Jefferson and his son are in their correctly assigned seats. I need to ask you to take your assigned seat in 3C so we can complete the boarding process." "This is ridiculous," Diane snapped. "I want to speak to the captain immediately. I'm not sitting in an aisle seat for a 3-hour flight because of some computer error." Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others annoyed at the delay. The elderly woman behind them muttered something to her husband about causing a scene. Isaiah leaned closer to his father. "Dad, should I move?" he whispered. Marcus squeezed his son's hand reassuringly. "No, Isaiah. This is your seat. You haven't done anything wrong." The tension in the cabin was palpable as Diane stood her ground, blocking the aisle and preventing other passengers from reaching their seats. The standoff was about to escalate to the next level. As the confrontation continued to unfold, the lead flight attendant, Jackson Wright, a distinguished black man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and an air of unflappable professionalism, made his way to the front of the cabin. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his deep voice calm yet authoritative. Diane whirled to face him, relief washing over her features at the sight of a senior crew member. "Yes, there certainly is. There's been a terrible mistake with the seating assignments. I need a window seat, and these people are refusing to accommodate me." Jackson glanced at Alicia, who discreetly handed him both boarding passes. He examined them carefully before addressing Diane. "Ms. Winters, according to our flight manifest, you're assigned to seat 3C. Mr. Jefferson and his son are correctly seated in 2A and 2B. His tone was polite but firm. "I understand you prefer a window seat, but I'm afraid we're fully booked in first class today. Perhaps after takeoff, if there are any." "This is absolutely unacceptable," Diane interrupted, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea who I am? I fly this airline at least twice a month. I've been a loyal customer for years." The businessman sitting across the aisle sighed audibly. Other passengers waiting to board were now backed up in the jet bridge, creating further delays. "I understand your frustration," Jackson continued, "but I must ask you to take your assigned seat so we can complete the boarding process." Diane's face flushed a deeper shade of red. "I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved to my satisfaction. I refuse to believe that I wasn't assigned a window seat." She turned her attention back to Isaiah, who was shrinking into his seat, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of such negative attention. "I don't mean to be rude," Diane said in a tone that suggested the opposite, "but I think these seats should go to frequent flyers who actually contribute to the airline's business. It's simply a matter of priority." Marcus, who had remained remarkably composed until this point, finally spoke up. "Ms. Winters, my son and I have valid tickets for these seats. We're not giving them up because you feel entitled to them." "Entitled?" Diane's eyes widened. "How dare you speak to me like that? Do you know how much money I spend with this airline every year?" A silver-haired man in his 60s, seated in the first row, turned around to observe the scene. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and had been quietly working on his tablet before the disruption. His eyes met Marcus's briefly, a flash of recognition passing between them, though he remained silent. "The boarding door needs to close in 7 minutes, Jackson informed them. "Ms. Winters, I must insist that you take your assigned seat immediately." "This is discrimination," Diane declared loudly. "I'm going to call corporate headquarters right now. I know people in management." She fumbled with her phone, her fingers trembling with anger. "I want the number for your corporate office." Jackson maintained his professional demeanor. "Ma'am, I need to remind you that all passengers must comply with crew member instructions. If you're unable to take your assigned seat, we may need to involve airport security. Isaiah looked up at his father, anxiety evident in his young face. Dad, he whispered. Marcus placed a protective arm around his son's shoulders. It's okay, Isaiah. Everything's going to be fine. Diane noticed the gesture and scoffed. Oh, please. Stop acting like I'm some kind of monster. This is about proper procedure and customer loyalty, not about your son. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the cabin. The elderly woman behind them clicked her tongue in disgust. Actually, Marcus said calmly, this is about respect and following the rules that apply to everyone. My son has a valid ticket for this seat, and he's going to stay in it. Well, some rules clearly don't apply to everyone equally, Diane retorted with a pointed look at Marcus and Isaiah. Some people get special treatment these days, don't they? The racial undertone of her comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jackson's professional mask slipped for just a second, his jaw tightening before he regained his composure. Ms. Winters, that comment was inappropriate and won't be tolerated on this aircraft, he stated firmly. I'm going to have to ask you once more to take your assigned seat, or I'll need to call the captain and security. Go ahead, Diane challenged, crossing her arms. Call the captain. I'd love to speak with someone who actually has some authority around here. The silver-haired man in the front row set aside his tablet and observed the situation with increasing interest. Meanwhile, the backup in the jet bridge was causing concerns throughout the aircraft. The departure time had already passed, and they were now officially delayed. Jackson nodded to Alicia, who moved toward the cockpit to inform the captain. The situation had escalated beyond what the cabin crew could handle, and intervention from higher authority was now necessary. Isaiah's eyes glistened with unshed tears despite his efforts to appear brave. Marcus leaned close to his son. Remember what we talked about, Isaiah, he whispered. This isn't about you. This is about her issues, not yours. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Isaiah nodded bravely, but Marcus could feel his son's small body trembling slightly beside him. This was supposed to be a special trip, a celebration of Isaiah's academic achievements and a rare opportunity for father-son bonding. Instead, it had become yet another lesson in dealing with prejudice, a lesson Marcus had hoped his son wouldn't have to learn quite so young. The tension in the cabin was reaching a breaking point. Something had to give. The rhythmic sound of approaching footsteps from the cockpit drew everyone's attention. Captain Darnell Robinson, a tall, imposing figure in his crisp uniform with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, emerged into the first-class cabin. At 43, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had navigated both literal and metaphorical turbulence throughout his career. What seems to be the issue here? Captain Robinson asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Diane's demeanor instantly shifted. Her confrontational stance softened, and she offered the captain what she clearly thought was her most charming smile. Captain, thank goodness. I've been trying to explain that there's been a terrible mix-up with the seating assignments. I always book a window seat due to my motion sickness, but somehow these people, she gestured dismissively toward Marcus and Isaiah, have been given my seat. Captain Robinson's gaze shifted to Marcus, and a flash of recognition crossed his features. To his credit, his expression remained neutral as he turned back to Diane. Let me see the boarding passes, please, he requested. Jackson handed over both documents. Captain Robinson examined them carefully, then looked up. Ms. Winters, your assigned seat is 3C. Mr. Jefferson and his son are correctly seated in 2A and 2B. There's no mistake in the system. But that's impossible, Diane insisted. I specifically booked a window seat. I always do. Perhaps these passengers would be willing to move. I'm sure they'd be just as comfortable in economy, and I'd be happy to cover any difference in fare. The audacity of her suggestion caused several passengers to gasp. The elderly couple behind them exchanged looks of disbelief. Captain Robinson's expression hardened slightly. Ms. Winters, Azure Skies Airlines has a strict non-discrimination policy, suggesting that other passengers should give up their legitimately purchased seats based on your assumptions about them is unacceptable. Discrimination? Diane sputtered. This has nothing to do with discrimination. This is about customer service and respecting loyal customers. Do you have any idea how much money I spend with this airline every year? The silver-haired man in the front row cleared his throat. Approximately $87,000 last year, if memory serves. Primarily on business routes between Atlanta and Chicago. All eyes turned to him in surprise. And you are? Diane demanded. James Bennett. Azure Skies Airlines board member. He smiled politely. Though that's hardly relevant to the current situation. Diane's eyes widened, her strategy instantly shifting. Mr. Bennett, I'm so pleased to meet you. I'm sure you understand the importance of customer loyalty. All I'm asking for is a simple seat change. Isaiah, who had been quiet throughout this exchange, finally spoke up in a small voice. Dad, maybe I should just. No, son, Marcus interrupted gently. You don't need to give up your seat. You haven't done anything wrong. Captain Robinson nodded in agreement. The young man is correct. Now, Ms. Winters, we've delayed departure long enough. I must insist that you take your assigned seat immediately or I'll have no choice but to involve airport security. Diane's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? I personally know the owner of this airline, and when he hears about this treatment, you'll all be looking for new jobs. What is your reaction to Diane's behavior so far? Comment number 1 if you think she's being completely unreasonable, or number 2 if you believe she deserves some sympathy for the seating mix-up. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you're enjoying this story of justice unfolding at 30,000 feet. Do you think the airline staff is handling this situation correctly? What would you do if you were in Marcus's position, watching your child being targeted by such blatant discrimination? Let me know in the comments. Diane's outburst hung in the air as she continued her tirade, gesturing wildly with her champagne glass. My friend Richard Johnson would never allow his customers to be treated this way. When I tell him about this incident. The champagne glass slipped from her grasp, shattering on the polished floor of the first-class cabin. The sound seemed to punctuate the tension that had been building. In that moment of shocked silence, Marcus Jefferson rose slowly from his seat. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who's in charge here, he said quietly. Captain Robinson stepped forward. Mr. Jefferson, sir, I apologize for this disruption to your flight. Diane's expression of shocked confusion was almost comical as she looked between them. Why are you apologizing to him? And who exactly is Richard Johnson? James Bennett chuckled from his seat. There is no Richard Johnson, Ms. Winters. You might want to check the name on the side of the plane you're standing in. The blood drained from Diane's face as realization began to dawn. The silence that fell over the first-class cabin was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the aircraft, the gentle hum of the ventilation system, the distant murmur from economy class, seemed to fade away as all attention focused on Marcus Jefferson. Richard Johnson doesn't exist, Marcus explained calmly. My name is Marcus Jefferson. I founded Azure Skies Airlines 12 years ago, and I currently serve as its CEO and majority shareholder. Diane's mouth opened and closed several times, no words emerging. Her complexion had transitioned from angry red to ghostly pale in seconds. The security officers who had been summoned during the confrontation now stood awkwardly at the entrance to the cabin, awaiting instructions. You're the owner. Diane finally managed to stammer. Marcus nodded once. I am. A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin as passengers processed this revelation. The influencer in row 3 was frantically typing on her phone, likely sharing the unfolding drama with her followers. Captain Robinson cleared his throat. Mr. Jefferson, we're currently running 23 minutes behind schedule. What would you like us to do regarding this situation? All eyes turned to Marcus, who stood thoughtfully for a moment, his hand still resting protectively on Isaiah's shoulder. Ms. Winters, he began, his voice level and controlled, you've displayed behavior today that violates our company policies on several levels. You've disrupted the boarding process, refused to comply with crew instructions, and most seriously, you've made discriminatory comments that made my son feel unwelcome and uncomfortable. Isaiah looked up at his father with a mixture of apprehension and pride. Marcus continued. Under normal circumstances, this would result in your immediate removal from the aircraft and a permanent ban from flying with Azure Skies. Diane's eyes widened in horror. Her previous bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization of just how catastrophically her assumptions had backfired. However, Marcus added, I believe in second chances and learning opportunities. The first-class cabin remained utterly silent, every passenger hanging on his next words. Azure Skies Airlines was born from my own experiences with discrimination in the travel industry. I remember all too well being bumped from flights, questioned about my seating assignment, and treated with suspicion in lounges and first-class cabins. Marcus's mind flashed back to the early days of his career. Fresh out of business school with an MBA from Harvard, he'd secured venture capital funding for his startup airline with a vision of creating a more inclusive travel experience. The journey hadn't been easy. Many investors had slammed doors in his face, unwilling to bet on a black entrepreneur in an industry dominated by white executives. His first fleet had consisted of just 2 leased aircraft serving regional routes. He'd worked 18-hour days, often cleaning the planes himself to save on costs. Through sheer determination, strategic partnerships, and an unwavering commitment to customer service, Azure Skies had grown into a major carrier with over 60 aircraft and routes spanning the country. Marcus refocused on the present moment, on Diane Winters who stood before him, her previous confidence shattered. Ms. Winters, I'm offering you a choice. You can either take your assigned seat and use this flight time to reflect on your behavior today, or you can deplane now and rebook on another carrier. Diane swallowed hard. I'll take my seat, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Before you do, Marcus continued, I need you to understand something. Every passenger on this aircraft deserves respect, from my son in 2A to the family in the last row of economy. That's the foundation of this airline, and it's non-negotiable. Diane nodded jerkily, unable to meet his gaze. I understand. I apologize for my behavior. The apology sounded hollow, but Marcus accepted it with a nod. Security will no longer be necessary, he informed the officers, who nodded and retreated from the cabin. As Diane moved toward her assigned seat in 3C, subdued and visibly shaken, James Bennett stood and approached Marcus. That was quite magnanimous, Marcus, he said, extending his hand. Most people in your position wouldn't have been so forgiving. Marcus shook his hand. It's not about forgiveness, James. It's about setting an example for my son. He glanced down at Isaiah, who was watching the exchange with wide, thoughtful eyes. Speaking of which, James continued, young man, I don't believe we've formally met. I'm James Bennett. Isaiah straightened in his seat, extending his small hand with perfect manners. Isaiah Jefferson, sir. It's nice to meet you. James smiled warmly. The pleasure is mine. Your father speaks of you often at board meetings. I hear you're quite the science enthusiast. Isaiah's face lit up. Yes, sir. We're going to the Metropolitan Museum in New York for my school project on ancient civilizations. Did you know the Egyptians had advanced mathematics thousands of years ago? I did indeed, James replied. Perhaps you'll tell me more about it during the flight. As the interaction concluded, Captain Robinson approached Marcus once more. Sir, if everything's settled, we should prepare for departure. Marcus nodded. Of course, Captain. Thank you for handling the situation professionally. Just doing my job, sir, Robinson replied with a slight smile. Though I must admit, the look on her face when she realized who you were, that might have been worth the delay. As Captain Robinson returned to the cockpit, the regular pre-departure routine resumed. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. The atmosphere gradually normalized, though occasional glances were still directed toward both Marcus and Diane. Isaiah tugged gently on his father's sleeve. "Dad? Are you mad?" Marcus settled back into his seat beside his son. "No, Isaiah. I'm not mad. But she was really mean. She didn't think we belonged here." Marcus considered his response carefully, aware that this moment would shape his son's understanding of how to respond to injustice. "Sometimes people make assumptions based on how we look," he explained quietly. "That doesn't make it right, but it's a reality we face. What matters is how we respond to it. We can let anger consume us, or we can stand firm in our dignity and prove them wrong through our actions." Isaiah pondered this for a moment. "Is that why you let her stay on the plane? To show dignity?" Marcus smiled at his son's perceptiveness. "Partly. And partly to show that true power isn't about punishment, but about creating opportunities for growth and change." As the engines began to roar to life and the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Isaiah pressed his face against the window, once again excited about the journey ahead. Marcus watched his son, hoping that today's difficult lesson would help shape him into a man of character and compassion. 20 minutes later, Azure Sky's Flight 237 lifted off into the clear blue sky, carrying its passengers, and a powerful lesson about assumptions, dignity, and justice, toward New York City. At 30,000 feet above the eastern seaboard, Azure Sky's Flight 237 had reached its cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin crew began their in-flight service. The first-class cabin had settled into an uneasy calm after the pre-departure drama. Marcus observed Diane Winters from the corner of his eye. She sat rigidly in her aisle seat, 3C, staring straight ahead. The confidence and entitlement she had displayed earlier had vanished completely, replaced by visible discomfort. She flinched slightly whenever a crew member approached, clearly fearing further consequences for her behavior. Security Officer Raymond Phillips approached Marcus's seat, leaning down to speak quietly. "Mr. Jefferson, I apologize for the intrusion. Airport security protocol requires me to file a report about the incident. Would you like to press charges for the passenger's disruptive behavior?" Isaiah looked up from his book with concern. Marcus shook his head. "That won't be necessary, officer. I believe Ms. Winters has learned her lesson." The security officer nodded respectfully. "As you wish, sir. I'll note your decision in my report." As Officer Phillips moved toward the exit, Diane watched with obvious relief. When he had left the aircraft, Jackson, the lead flight attendant, approached Marcus. "Mr. Jefferson, I want to apologize again for the incident. We should have handled the situation more effectively before it escalated." "You have nothing to apologize for, Jackson," Marcus assured him. "Your team acted professionally throughout. Some situations simply need to run their course." Jackson nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir. Can I get you or your son anything to drink?" Isaiah perked up. "Apple juice, please. And just water for me," Marcus added. As Jackson moved away to prepare their drinks, James Bennett made his way down the aisle and paused beside their row. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat across from them. The businessman who had been sitting there had relocated to the rear of first class, apparently preferring distance from the lingering tension. "Please," Marcus gestured to the seat. James settled in comfortably. "That was quite a scene," he remarked quietly. "Though I must say, you handled it with remarkable restraint." "I had my son watching," Marcus replied simply. Isaiah, sensing the adults wanted to talk, returned to his book about ancient Egyptian pharaohs, though his ears remained perked to catch their conversation. "I've been on the board for 5 years now," James continued, "and I've seen you navigate billion-dollar negotiations with the same calm you displayed today. But I'm curious, why do you keep your identity so private? Most CEOs I know would have gold-plated business cards and their name emblazoned on everything. Marcus smiled slightly. I found that anonymity has its advantages. When people don't know who I am, they show their true colors. It's educational. And occasionally dramatic, James added with a chuckle. Besides, Marcus continued, I want Azure Skies to be known for its service and values, not for who owns it. The company should be bigger than any individual. James nodded thoughtfully. Well, your approach certainly created quite the teaching moment today. Speaking of which, he turned to Isaiah, who pretended to be deeply absorbed in his book. Young man, your father tells me you're at the top of your class. Isaiah looked up, unable to hide his pleased smile. I like learning, sir. A fine quality, James replied. And what do you think you learned today? Isaiah considered the question seriously. That sometimes people judge you before they know you. And that how you respond to unfairness matters more than the unfairness itself. James looked impressed. That's remarkably insightful for someone your age. He has a good teacher, Marcus said, resting his hand proudly on Isaiah's shoulder. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion several rows back. Diane had risen from her seat and was making her way toward them, her movements hesitant but determined. The cabin crew watched her closely, ready to intervene if necessary. She stopped beside their row, her hands clutched tightly together. The designer confidence she had worn earlier had been replaced by genuine discomfort. Mr. Jefferson, she began, her voice much quieter than before, I wanted to apologize. My behavior was inexcusable. Marcus regarded her steadily, neither helping nor hindering her apology. I made assumptions based on, she trailed off, perhaps realizing there was no way to finish that sentence acceptably. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Especially to you, she added, looking directly at Isaiah for the first time. Isaiah glanced at his father, uncertain how to respond. Thank you for your apology, Ms. Winters, Marcus said evenly. I appreciate you taking responsibility for your actions. Diane nodded awkwardly. I understand if you want to ban me from the airline. I would deserve it. Marcus studied her for a moment. Azure Skies has a 3-strike policy for passenger misconduct. Consider this your first strike. Whether there's a second is entirely up to you. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. That's very generous. It's not generosity, Marcus corrected her. It's our company policy, which applies equally to everyone. The significance of his words wasn't lost on her. Diane nodded again, more soberly this time, before returning to her seat. As she walked away, Jackson approached with their drinks. Looks like someone had a change of heart, he observed quietly as he served them. People often rise or fall to the expectations we set for them, Marcus replied. Sometimes they just need the opportunity to do better. Jackson smiled. Is there anything else I can get for you, Mr. Jefferson? Actually, Marcus said, I'd like to speak to the entire first-class cabin for a moment, if that's all right. Of course, sir. Jackson helped Marcus get everyone's attention. The 12 passengers in first class looked up expectantly as Marcus stood in the aisle. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for the delay in our departure today. As some of you may have gathered, I'm Marcus Jefferson, CEO of Azure Skies Airlines. A few passengers who hadn't witnessed the earlier confrontation looked surprised by this revelation. When I founded this company 12 years ago, I had a vision of creating an airline where every passenger would be treated with equal respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or what they look like. That remains our core value today. He paused, looking around at the attentive faces. What happened before takeoff was unfortunate, but I believe it also reinforced why that value matters so much. We all carry our own biases and assumptions. The question is whether we let them control our actions. Several passengers nodded in agreement. I'd like to thank you for your patience during the delay, and to assure you that Azure Skies remains committed to providing you with the best possible flying experience. If there's anything my team can do to make your journey more comfortable today, please don't hesitate to ask. As Marcus returned to his seat, a spontaneous round of applause broke out among the passengers. Even Diane, after a moment's hesitation, joined in. Isaiah beamed up at his father. "That was awesome, Dad." Marcus smiled, settling back beside his son. "Just remember, Isaiah, leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about how you treat people, especially when challenges arise." As the flight continued toward New York, the atmosphere in the cabin gradually relaxed. Flight attendants served meals, passengers watched movies or worked on laptops, and the earlier tension dissipated like clouds in the jet stream behind them. Marcus watched his son become engrossed in his book again, his young face serious with concentration. Today had not gone as planned, but perhaps the lesson Isaiah had witnessed would prove more valuable than anything they might see at the Metropolitan Museum. Some educations, Marcus reflected, couldn't be found in any classroom. As Azure Skies Flight 237 continued its journey to New York, the aftermath of the confrontation gradually settled into a new equilibrium. The first-class cabin had transformed from a battleground of tension to a space of reflection and, surprisingly, connection. The captain's voice came over the intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about halfway through our flight to JFK International Airport. Weather conditions in New York are clear with temperatures around 72 degrees. We expect to arrive only 15 minutes behind schedule despite our delayed departure." Isaiah had finally relaxed enough to enjoy the flight experience. He was currently testing every feature of his seat, much to Marcus's amusement. "Dad, look! The footrest comes all the way up, and there's a massage setting," he exclaimed, pressing buttons on the seat control panel. "Just make sure you're not kicking the seat in front of you," Marcus reminded him gently. Across the aisle, James Bennett chuckled at Isaiah's enthusiasm. "First time in first class?" he asked the boy. Isaiah shook his head. "No, sir. But it's my first time knowing my dad owns the whole airplane." This brought genuine laughter from several nearby passengers, including James. Even Diane, seated just behind them, managed a small smile. Jackson approached with a tray of refreshments. "Mr. Jefferson, we've had several passengers ask if they could speak with you briefly." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Of course." The elderly couple from row 3 were the first to approach. The woman, who introduced herself as Eleanor Simmons, clasped Marcus's hand warmly. "Mr. Jefferson, my husband Richard and I want you to know how impressed we were with how you handled that difficult situation. Such dignity and restraint. It reminded me of the civil rights demonstrations we participated in during the 60s. Her husband nodded in agreement. "We've been flying for over 50 years, and we've seen how things have changed, mostly for the better. But what happened today reminded us that there's still work to be done." Marcus thanked them sincerely. "It's people like you who paved the way for people like me. I'm grateful for your kind words." After they returned to their seats, a middle-aged woman named Gabriela Rodriguez came forward. "Mr. Jefferson, I run a diversity and inclusion program for a major corporation in New York. Would it be inappropriate to ask if you might consider speaking at our annual leadership conference? What you demonstrated today was a masterclass in handling discrimination with grace." "I'd be happy to discuss it," Marcus replied, providing her with his business email. "My assistant can work out the details." One by one, several other passengers came to express their support and admiration. The social media influencer, Zoe Parker, approached somewhat sheepishly. Mr. Jefferson? I hope you don't mind, but I posted about what happened before takeoff." She bit her lip nervously. "It's already going viral. People are calling you first-class CEO, and praising how you handled the situation." Marcus sighed. While he preferred to keep a low profile, he had expected something like this in the age of social media. "Thank you for letting me know, Ms. Parker. I hope your post emphasizes the lesson rather than vilifying any individual." Absolutely, she assured him. It's all about dignity in the face of prejudice. That's the message. As the cabin settled back into routine, Isaiah tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad? Are you famous now? Marcus smiled ruefully. I hope not, buddy. I prefer being behind the scenes. But what you did was really cool, Isaiah insisted. You stood up for us without being mean, even when she was being super rude. That's the trick, Isaiah. Standing firm doesn't require being unkind. Remember that. Dignity doesn't shout, it stands its ground quietly. Isaiah nodded thoughtfully, processing this wisdom. I think I get it. Like in my book about Dr. King. He said something about the content of character. That's right. Not by the color of their skin but by the content of their character. It's about who people are, not what they look like. Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Robinson's announcement that they were beginning their initial descent into New York airspace. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, collecting glasses and ensuring seatbelts were fastened. Jackson paused beside their row. Mr. Jefferson, the crew wanted me to express our appreciation for how you handled things today. It meant a lot to us, especially those of us who've experienced similar situations. Marcus nodded understanding. The airline industry, like many others, had its share of discrimination issues. It was one of the reasons he'd founded Azure Skies with such a strong emphasis on inclusivity, not just for passengers, but for employees as well. Your professionalism made all the difference, Jackson. Please convey my thanks to the entire crew. As Jackson moved on, James Bennett leaned across the aisle. You know, Marcus, this incident might actually benefit the company. The social media attention is overwhelmingly positive. People respect how you handled it. Marcus shrugged. That wasn't my goal, but if it helps reinforce our company values, I won't complain. Always the reluctant public figure, James said with a smile. By the way, don't forget we have the expansion meeting next Thursday. The Seattle and Portland routes are looking promising. I'll be there, Marcus assured him. Though I suspect today's events might dominate the conversation. As the plane began its descent toward JFK International Airport, Marcus noticed Diane Winters sitting quietly in her seat, seemingly lost in thought. Catching his glance, she gave a small, tentative nod of acknowledgement. Not exactly friendship, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The plane banked gently, revealing the Manhattan skyline in the distance. Isaiah pressed his face against the window in awe. Dad, look. Is that the Empire State Building? It sure is. And somewhere down there is the museum we're going to visit tomorrow. As the sprawling city came into clearer view, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here, not just today's flight, but the long path from a boy with a dream to the CEO of a major airline. There had been obstacles and challenges, many of them similar to what had transpired today. But each one had taught him valuable lessons about perseverance, dignity, and the power of standing firm in one's principles. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud, and the aircraft began its final approach. Isaiah's excitement was palpable as they prepared to touch down in New York. Despite the rough start, their father-son trip was back on track. As the wheels made contact with the runway, Marcus felt a sense of satisfaction. Today's unplanned lesson might be the most valuable souvenir Isaiah would take home from their New York adventure. The controlled chaos of JFK International Airport enveloped Marcus and Isaiah as they made their way through the terminal. Unlike their departure from Atlanta, their arrival had been smooth and uneventful. The flight attendants had bid them farewell with special warmth, and Captain Robinson had personally thanked them for flying Azure Skies. Dad, are we taking the subway to the hotel? Isaiah asked, pulling his small carry-on suitcase behind him. Not today, buddy. I arranged for a car service. As they approached the baggage claim area, Marcus's phone began to vibrate incessantly with incoming messages and emails. He glanced at the screen and sighed. News of the incident had indeed spread rapidly. Everything okay? Isaiah asked, noticing his father's expression. Just work stuff, Marcus replied, not wanting to burden his son with the details. Nothing that can't wait until after our museum trip tomorrow. A professionally dressed woman holding a tablet with Jefferson displayed on the screen approached them. Mr. Jefferson. I'm Aisha Patel from Azure Sky's New York office. The company sent me to assist with anything you might need during your stay. Marcus hadn't requested this service, which meant the corporate office was already in damage control mode. Thank you, Ms. Patel, but that's not necessary. My son and I are planning a personal trip. Aisha lowered her voice. Sir, I understand completely. However, there's been significant media attention. The video of the incident has over 2 million views already. Several news outlets are requesting statements. Isaiah's eyes widened. 2 million people saw what happened. That's more than the population of some countries. Marcus placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. Ms. Patel, I appreciate the heads up. Please tell the PR team I'll call them this evening after my son and I are settled in our hotel. Of course, sir. Your car is waiting outside. The driver will take you directly to your hotel, and we've arranged for additional security, just in case. Marcus wanted to protest that extra security was unnecessary, but the growing recognition in the eyes of passing travelers suggested otherwise. Several people had already done double takes, and one woman was openly filming them with her phone. Thank you, Ms. Patel. Let's go, Isaiah. The sleek black SUV with tinted windows whisked them away from the airport and into the Manhattan traffic. Isaiah stared out the window, captivated by the towering buildings and bustling streets. Marcus used the opportunity to quickly scan through his messages. The company's public relations director had sent an urgent request for a statement. The board chairman had called twice. There were interview requests from major networks and newspapers. Even more concerning were the messages from Azure Sky's employees, many expressing their gratitude for how he had handled the situation. One message in particular caught his attention. Mr. Jefferson. I've been a flight attendant with Azure Skies for 7 years. Today's incident resonated with many of us who faced similar treatment but felt powerless to address it. Your response showed exactly why we're proud to work for this airline. Thank you for standing up not just for your son, but for all of us. Respectfully. Tamara Wilson *. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. While he appreciated the support, he hadn't intended to become a symbol or spokesperson. His priority had simply been protecting his son and maintaining their dignity. Dad, look! There's Times Square! Isaiah exclaimed, pointing excitedly at the iconic location as they drove past. Marcus set his phone aside, determined to be present for his son. Pretty impressive, isn't it? Wait until you see Central Park tomorrow. When they arrived at their hotel, the manager was waiting to greet them personally, another sign that word had spread quickly. They were escorted directly to their suite without the usual check-in process. Mr. Jefferson, we've upgraded you to our executive suite, the manager explained as he personally opened their door. If there's anything at all you need during your stay, please don't hesitate to call me directly. After thanking him and declining his offer of complimentary room service, Marcus finally closed the door and exhaled deeply. Isaiah immediately ran to the window to take in the spectacular view of the city. Dad, this is amazing. Can we order pizza? Real New York pizza. Marcus smiled, grateful for his son's ability to focus on the joys of their trip despite the earlier unpleasantness. Absolutely. New York pizza is a must. While Isaiah explored the suite, Marcus stepped onto the balcony to make a necessary call. Patricia Chen, Azure Sky's Chief Communications Officer, answered immediately. Marcus, thank you for calling. I assume you've seen the social media response. I've gotten the highlights, he replied. How bad is it? Bad isn't the word I'd use, Patricia said. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. You're being praised for handling a racially charged situation with dignity and restraint. Our customer service lines are actually being flooded with supportive calls. Marcus hadn't expected that. And the woman involved? Ms. Winters? No public statement from her, though she's been identified on social media. Her company, Winters Financial Advisors, has gone into crisis management mode. They've issued a statement saying they're looking into the matter and that the alleged behavior doesn't reflect company values. I hope she's not receiving threats or harassment, Marcus said. That wouldn't help anyone. Always thinking of others, even after how she treated you and Isaiah, Patricia remarked. That's why people are responding so positively. What would you like us to say officially? Marcus considered this carefully. Keep it simple and forward-looking. Something like, at Azure Skies, we believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Today's incident, while unfortunate, reinforces our commitment to creating an inclusive environment for all passengers and employees. Perfect, Patricia replied. And interview requests? Decline them all, politely. Explain that I'm on a personal trip with my son and not available for comment. After finishing the call, Marcus rejoined Isaiah inside. The boy was sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed, scrolling through something on his tablet. Dad, we're trending on Twitter. There's a hashtag called #FirstClassCEO. Marcus sat beside his son. How do you feel about all this attention? Isaiah thought for a moment. It's weird. But also kind of cool that people think you did the right thing. He hesitated. Some kids at school might see it though. Does that worry you? Isaiah shrugged. Maybe a little. I don't want to be that kid from the video when school starts. Marcus put his arm around his son's shoulders. People's attention spans are short. By the time school starts, there will be new trends and hashtags. But if anyone does bring it up, just remember, you have nothing to be embarrassed about. You handled yourself with dignity, just like we've talked about. Isaiah nodded, then looked up at his father with serious eyes. Dad? That lady, do you think she learned anything today? It was a profound question from someone so young. Marcus considered it carefully. I hope so, Isaiah. Sometimes people need to have their assumptions challenged before they can grow. But real change comes from within. We can't control what she takes away from this experience, only how we responded to it. Isaiah seemed satisfied with this answer. Can we order that pizza now? I'm starving. As Marcus reached for the hotel phone, his own cell phone chimed with a new email notification. The sender's name caught his attention, Diane Winters. While Isaiah flipped through TV channels, Marcus opened the message. Mr. Jefferson. Words cannot adequately express my remorse for my behavior today. There is no excuse for how I acted or what I said. When I realized who you were, my first reaction was embarrassment at having misjudged someone of your status. But during the flight, I came to understand that this reaction was part of the problem. Your position shouldn't matter, no one deserves to be treated the way I treated you and your son. I've spent the last several hours reflecting on my behavior and the assumptions that led to it. This isn't who I want to be. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that today has been a powerful wake-up call. I will be using this experience to make meaningful changes in my outlook and behavior. Respectfully. Diane Winters *. Marcus read the email twice. It seemed genuine, more thoughtful than he might have expected. He decided to respond later, after he'd had time to consider his words carefully. For now, his priority was ordering that New York pizza and helping his son prepare for tomorrow's museum adventure. As challenging as today had been, it had also reinforced why this trip mattered so much. Beyond the educational value of the museum, Isaiah had received a real-world lesson in handling adversity with grace, a lesson Marcus hoped would serve him well throughout his life. As father and son sat together eating pizza and planning their museum route, the outside world, with its viral videos, media requests, and social media hashtags, faded into the background. What remained was what had always mattered most, the bond between them, strengthened by shared experience and mutual respect. Tomorrow would bring new adventures and, undoubtedly, new challenges. But for tonight, in a luxury hotel suite overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, they were simply a father and son enjoying each other's company, exactly as Marcus had planned all along. 1 month later, the auditorium of Westview Academy fell silent as Isaiah Jefferson approached the podium. The 7th grade Ancient Civilizations exhibition was the culmination of months of research, and Isaiah's project had generated particular interest, partly due to his thorough research, and partly due to his newfound notoriety. The ancient Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the concept of truth, balance, and order, Isaiah began confidently. They understood that maintaining harmony required both justice and compassion. From the back of the auditorium, Marcus watched with unmistakable pride. The shy, uncertain boy who had shrunk in his airplane seat a month ago now commanded the attention of the entire room. His presentation was articulate and engaging, weaving together historical facts with personal insights. When I visited the Temple of Dendar at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Isaiah continued, displaying a photograph of himself standing before the ancient structure, I was struck by how the Egyptians built something so lasting. They created something that would continue to teach and inspire people thousands of years later. As Isaiah moved through his presentation, Marcus reflected on their New York trip. Despite the turbulent beginning, it had been everything he'd hoped for and more. They had spent hours exploring the museum, with Isaiah taking meticulous notes and photographs for his project. They had walked through Central Park, taken in a Broadway show, and enjoyed authentic cuisine from various cultures throughout the city. Most importantly, they had talked about the incident on the plane, about handling discrimination, about standing up for oneself without losing one's dignity. These conversations had sparked a noticeable change in Isaiah. He stood taller now, spoke more confidently, and seemed more comfortable in his own skin. In conclusion, Isaiah said, approaching the end of his presentation, the ancient Egyptians believed that a person's heart would be weighed against the feather of truth in the afterlife. Only those whose hearts were lighter than the feather could move forward. I think this teaches us something important about integrity and identity. When we stay true to ourselves and treat others with respect, our hearts remain light, even in difficult situations. The audience erupted in applause. Isaiah's teacher, Ms. Washington, stepped forward to thank him, clearly impressed by the depth of his analysis. As students and parents moved toward the exhibition tables to examine the projects more closely, Marcus made his way to his son. "That was outstanding, Isaiah," he said, embracing him. "I couldn't be prouder." Isaiah beamed. "Did you like the part about Ma'at?" "I added that after our talk about standing firm with dignity." "I noticed." "Very clever connection." Ms. Washington approached them, smiling broadly. "Mr. Jefferson, your son's project received the highest grade in the class. His analysis of Egyptian cultural values and their relevance to modern ethical challenges was remarkably sophisticated." "Thank you, Ms. Washington. Isaiah worked very hard on it." "It certainly shows. And may I say, the way you handled that situation last month was an incredible example for these young people. We actually discussed it in our ethics module." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You discussed us in class?" "With Isaiah's permission, yes. It provided a concrete example of responding to injustice with dignity rather than escalation. Several students mentioned it in their own projects about modern applications of ancient wisdom." As Ms. Washington moved on to speak with other parents, Isaiah looked up at his father. "I got an A+, Dad. You earned it, son. Do you think we could go back to New York sometime? There were parts of the museum we didn't get to see." "Absolutely. Though maybe we'll try a different airline next time," Marcus joked. "Give someone else a chance to provide good service." Isaiah laughed. "I bet they'd recognize you now. Everyone at school did. Parker Wilson asked if I could get his family upgraded to first class." "And what did you tell him?" "That it doesn't work that way. But mostly I just said I'd rather talk about my project than about what happened on the plane. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good answer. Later that evening, as they drove home from the exhibition, Marcus received a call from Patricia Chen, his communications director. Just wanted to update you on our new training program, she said when he answered. The Dignity in Flight initiative has been implemented across all departments. Initial feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Following the incident, Azure Skies had launched a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. All employees, from baggage handlers to executives, were receiving enhanced training on recognizing and addressing bias. The company had also revised its passenger conduct policies, making them more explicit about zero tolerance for discrimination. Glad to hear it, Marcus replied. Any pushback? Minimal. A few complained about political correctness, but the vast majority see it as a positive step. Our employee satisfaction scores have actually increased by 7% since implementation. And how about our unexpected social media fame? Has that died down? Mostly, though your approval rating remains stratospheric. The board is thrilled with the positive publicity. In fact, James Bennett called it the best marketing we never paid for. After ending the call, Marcus glanced at Isaiah, who was scrolling through photos of their New York trip on his phone. Work stuff? Isaiah asked. Just updates on some new company initiatives. The one good thing about what happened is that it's helping us make positive changes throughout the airline. Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. MS. Washington says that's how progress happens sometimes. Something bad leads to something good. When they arrived home, Marcus found a large envelope in their mailbox. The return address showed it was from Diane Winters. Inside was a formal letter on Winters' financial advisor's letterhead. Dear Mr. Jefferson. Following our previous correspondence, I wanted to update you on the steps I've taken since our unfortunate encounter. First, I've enrolled myself and my entire management team in an intensive diversity and inclusion training program. This is not merely a corporate box-checking exercise but a genuine commitment to change. Second, our firm has established a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, with an initial endowment of $100,000. While this cannot undo my actions, I hope it will create opportunities for the next generation. Finally, on a personal level, I've begun volunteering with a community organization that provides mentoring to underprivileged youth. This experience has been humbling and eye-opening. I want to thank you again for the grace you showed me that day. Your restraint in the face of my inexcusable behavior gave me the opportunity to reflect and grow rather than simply face punishment. That lesson in leadership will stay with me forever. Respectfully. Diane Winters ***. Attached to the letter was a brochure for the scholarship program and a personal note thanking Isaiah for his forgiveness as well. Marcus showed the letter to his son. What do you think about this? Isaiah read it carefully. Do you think she means it? I believe she does, Marcus replied. People can change when they're ready to acknowledge their mistakes and do the work to be better. Should we write back? Marcus considered this. I think we should. Maybe we could tell her about your A+ project. Later that evening, after Isaiah had gone to bed, Marcus sat in his home office reviewing the quarterly reports for Azure Skies. The incident had indeed generated unexpected positive publicity for the airline. Bookings were up, customer satisfaction scores had improved, and employee morale had never been higher. James Bennett had suggested capitalizing further on the attention by featuring Marcus more prominently in company marketing, but Marcus had declined. His preference for working behind the scenes remained unchanged. The company values should speak for themselves without needing a personality to embody them. His phone chimed with a text message from Captain Darnell Robinson. Just completed the new training program. Impressive stuff. The crew is still talking about how you handled things that day. You've set a new standard for all of us. Thank you, ***. Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond business metrics. Real change was happening, not just in policies and procedures, but in hearts and minds. That was the legacy he wanted to build, both at Azure Skies and for his son. He closed his laptop and walked to Isaiah's room, gently opening the door to check on him. The boy was sleeping peacefully, his exhibition materials neatly organized on his desk for school tomorrow. Beside them lay a framed photograph taken in front of the Temple of Dender, father and son smiling together, unaware of how their journey would become about so much more than ancient history. Marcus quietly closed the door, reflecting on how a single moment of confrontation had cascaded into waves of positive change. The incident hadn't defined them, their response to it had. And in choosing dignity over anger, restraint over retaliation, they had created something lasting, much like the ancient Egyptians Isaiah so admired. As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about their next father-son adventure. Perhaps they would explore the culture and history of Washington, D.C., or the natural wonders of the Grand Canyon. Wherever they went, he knew that Isaiah was growing into a young man of character and conviction, equipped to face whatever challenges might come his way. The lessons of Flight 237 would remain with them both, a reminder that true power lies not in status or authority, but in maintaining one's dignity and using one's influence to create positive change. In the balance of Ma'at that Isaiah had described so eloquently, their hearts would indeed remain lighter than a feather. This story teaches us several powerful lessons about confronting racism and discrimination. First, it shows us that maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice requires tremendous self-control but ultimately proves more effective than responding with anger. Marcus didn't allow someone else's bias to dictate his behavior or lower his standards. Second, we learn that true leadership isn't about wielding power over others, but about using your influence to create positive change. Marcus could have simply had Diane removed from the flight, but instead chose to create a teaching moment that transformed not just one person but an entire company. Third, the story reminds us that children learn more from what we do than what we say. Isaiah witnessed firsthand how to respond to injustice with grace and strength, a lesson more valuable than any theoretical discussion about racism could provide. Finally, we see that genuine growth requires acknowledging mistakes and taking concrete action to address them. Diane's journey from entitled prejudice to self-awareness demonstrates that meaningful change is possible when we're willing to confront our own biases. These lessons remind us that while we cannot control how others treat us, we always retain control over how we respond, and that choice makes all the difference. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have shown the same restraint and dignity when faced with such blatant discrimination? Let me know in the comments below. If this story of justice, dignity, and transformation touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful real-life stories. Don't forget to share this video with someone who might need a reminder about standing firm in their own dignity today. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is maintaining your dignity while standing your ground.